please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Trish.
Mrs. Brew,
Here.
Mr. Kramer,
Here.
Mr. Menegini,
Here.
Mr. Moraro, Mr. Pop.
Do I have a motion to excuse Mr. Pop?
I'll make a motion to excuse Mr. Pop.
Support.
Mr. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Menegini,
Yes.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes. Do I have a motion to excuse Mr. Moraro?
Make a motion to excuse Mr. Moraro.
Support.
Mr. Menegini,
Yes.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes.
Mr. Kramer.
Yes.
Move on to approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion on the agenda?
Make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes.
Mr. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Menegini.
Yes.
Approval of minutes of the regular meeting of December 20th, 2021.
I move that we approve the minutes of the regular meeting of December 20th, 2021.
Support.
Mr. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Menegini,
Yes.
Mrs. Brew.
Yes. Approval of manifest 2022-01. Brett, did you have any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Rico?
No questions.
And I have none. Do we have a motion?
I move we approve manifest 2021 or 2022-01 in the amount of $424,954.20.
Support.
Mr. Menegini,
Yes.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes.
Mr. Kramer.
Yes.
Do we have any previous questions?
We had the one question, that was the Muni Code question from the last meeting. I did provide quite an extensive explanation in the memo, but just briefly, if you look, we codified our ordinances in 2003, and a codified ordinance is basically, each time our ordinances are created and passed, they provided a sequential number. But when you codify them, it puts them in a book format that is in categories as opposed to in just numbers. So it's basically for the public and for staff so that you can understand, like if you want to find traffic ordinance, you can go to the section on traffic as opposed to going through the numbers to try and figure out which numbered ordinance it is. That's the whole form of codification. There was also a legal effort to eliminate any ordinances that were no longer withstanding. So over the years, we've had a code put on our webpage so that the public can go online and see that code. And if you see through my memo, we normally budget like $2,000 a year for updating that code. When every time we amend an ordinance or create an ordinance during the year, it has to be formatted and put into this online code. And typically, it costs us just basically up to $2,000. When we have the zoning code update, it's usually more expensive, typically somewhere between that $5,000 and $6,000 range. So as I pointed out in my memo, we go back into the accounts payable. We basically had in 2012 and 13, 2017 and 2020. Those are times that we had major updates in our code. A lot of that has to do with, at that time in 12 and 13, we were switching to that Norway area code that had a major update. This last time, that was when we had to switch back to just the city-only code. So that we had to actually go through the whole thing and revise. So that is basically the answer to why that number is where it's at. Now, we try to anticipate, from a budget standpoint, having those major updates. So typically it's budgeted when we know we're gonna have major zoning, so.
Okay. Thank you, Ray.
You're welcome.
Anyone in the audience wishing to address the council on an agenda item only do so at the podium. In either case, state your name and address for the record. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes per person. We'll move on to public hearing. Do I need a motion? Yeah.
I'll make a motion to go into public hearing.
Support.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes.
Mr. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Menegini,
Yes.
Repeal ordinance number 429, unlicensed vehicle. Mr. Anderson.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is actually a pretty simple operation. Back a few years ago, we had ordinance number 429, where we, in the property maintenance code, in a section for vehicles, it has the term licensed, operable, inoperable, or operable and licensed. So if you're inoperable and unlicensed, then you're in violation of property maintenance code. In the ordinance 429, all we did was we eliminated the word licensed. So our property maintenance code currently only regulates inoperable vehicles on your property. It does nothing to do with the motor vehicle code, because the motor vehicle code only goes into effect when that vehicle leaves the property onto public property, onto the public streets right away. Then it must be licensed. So there were a number of different scenarios that were brought forward at the time, and the council agreed that and it went through planning commission as well, and they thought that it would be agreeable to remove that word licensed, because of, and a couple of them are, somebody has a large property, maybe even in the farm area where they have an operating vehicle that they don't license, they never take off their property, so they use it on their property, or a seasonal vehicle that they're plowing or doing something. Another is for sale. That was a big one that we used to get complaints. You know, somebody would have a car and they throw a for sale sign on it, and it would just be a perpetual for sale. I mean, we'd have to deal with it, but they would have to have it licensed in order to try and sell it. And so that was another one that we thought that at that time that it was good to remove the licensing requirements. Recently, there's been some complaints. And in fact, over the last couple of years since we've done that, there's been some complaints about vehicles being on properties that, without the licensing requirement, that we should be addressing. And so we brought back to council if they want to have licensed vehicles as a requirement again, that all we do is repeal that ordinance, basically putting that license term back into the property maintenance code.
And basically what was happening is people were taking advantage of this and piling up vehicles in their yards and everything else. That's the reason we're looking at this and blocking driveways with vehicles that aren't licensed.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of other avenues for people with legitimate uses of an unlicensed vehicle, whether it be a farm vehicle or a seasonal,
That's different.
I think that's a lot different.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's not the reason why we're looking at changing this.
No,
Even someone putting a car for sale.
right.
I agree with the intent of it, but I also would say, yep, it's being abused.
So there is a permitting option.
Exactly.
We
Yeah.
said
Yeah.
it's a no-fee permit. Grant and I are going to go get together and go through. In fact, this is an opportunity for us to look at like the dumpster ordinance that we just passed, and some others that have these permits, and come up with a schedule that, because how long are the permits good for?
Exactly.
How often can they renew? Those are a couple different. You brought up the point last meeting, is this commercial or is it
Residential.
residential only, or commercial and residential? If we do commercial as well, we should probably identify that.
Agricultural.
Agricultural, there could be those exemptions, or we can just do the permit. So if you do an agricultural exemption, rather than put it in the ordinance, you could do a no-term permit, basically, that says you got vehicles and you do multiple vehicles on it. Another one is a body shop or an auto repair shop. I know that we have a couple in town, have quite a few vehicles on their lot. So are they licensed, not licensed? Are they, should they be allowed?
Yeah. Have they been sitting there for 4 months?
Well,
Yeah.
and there's different reasons when we talk to the owner. I mean, one of the main problems is somebody will bring the car in and get fixed and then they don't pay their bill. So they're not gonna pick up their car, so then they have this car sitting there. So I think there's other avenues too that we have to investigate. I'm gonna be bringing this back to the planning commission to have them review it from, especially in that permitting, side, to get their comments on that. So,
I would like to hear what they have to say too. I mean, cause this ain't to go out and punish people who, like a farm who's got a plow truck that they use or whatever. I mean, this is, they're
Yeah.
blocking driveways, it's sitting there with one tire on it, and it's been there for years. It's an eyesore and blocking, vision.
yeah, and I know when we had it before, one of the areas that we struggled with was they had an exemption if there was a for sale sign in. Well, then the for sale sign never left, so it became a
Yeah.
perpetually for sale vehicle. So the permitting process actually helps too in the communication with the person. So we did not put this on for any kind of action tonight because we wanted to go through, we wanted to hold the public hearing but then go through this permitting questions and have that back to you because we would rather, I know talking to Grant, we think it would be better from an operational standpoint if council had more flexibility outside of the ordinance, if you wanted to make some minor changes to how the permits are handled, as opposed to putting any of that language in the ordinance, because once it's in the ordinance, then you gotta go through that whole
The whole
process.
process, yeah. No,
Right.
yeah, see, stuff like that I know is gonna take probably a lot more time than we realize to iron out, to have you and Grant iron all that
Yeah.
language out, but I really appreciate that, so we can, okay, let's get it set, let's get it right.
Let's do it right.
Do it right the first time.
Yeah.
So then we don't have to,
And there's a good
Wobble
chance
back.
in 2 weeks, we're not gonna have all that ironed
That's
out.
okay.
But the thing is, you could still pass the ordinance, you have a 15-day enactment, and, we could work with the permitting even if we don't have all of the details.
work in
later.
progress.
So, but
Thank
we'll
you,
wait
Ryan.
2 weeks and then you can see it.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Did I have anybody in the audience? No? No? Okay, do I have a motion to go back into regular session?
I move we go back in a regular session.
Mr. Kramer? Yes. Mr. Menegini?
Yes?
Mrs. Brew?
Yes? Ordinance mobile food truck operations, Mr. Anderson.
Well, as we brought up at the last meeting, that we wanted to bring this back forward. It's been through Planning Commission, it's been through DDA. Sending it back through to them is not really gonna create any additional changes because I think that, we've pretty much incorporated all of our comments into what you see in front of you. I think it really comes down to council purview of what direction you want us to move with this language, with this ordinance.
Well, we gotta do something with this. We've been
Yeah,
dragging our
yeah.
feet on this.
If you don't have the changes in the ordinance, then I could bring this forward for enactment because you've already had the public hearing on this language.
Right.
So we could do that. Again, this might be another one that when it comes to the details in the permitting, that could be done through the same conversations Grant and I are gonna have with the other permits.
We haven't
This
come
one does have a fee, but
Have we come up with a fee schedule?
we have, what we did was we have a 1 month, 3 month, or a daily,
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what we had. We had you have a daily permit, you have a monthly, and then we have a 3 month.
Yeah, I remember that was presented at the last, or maybe
Yeah.
not the last, but
A couple
recently.
meetings ago.
And
And so that would be your fee
That
structure.
had stayed the same.
The
And that
question
was,
will be, how long do you wanna allow for the permits? How many do you give? I use a specific example of the ice cream truck that runs through town now, that he should get a
3
food
month.
vendor permit.
Right.
So he usually runs June, July, and August. So
Right.
he could come in and get a 3-month permit and he could run around and do his thing in
Right.
town.
Right.
And if he wants to add an extra month, he can add an extra month,
Right
So-
now, doesn't he get a vendor peddler?
He doesn't get anything right now. He's just been running through and I do need to contact him and say, okay, hey, once we get this done, I really do want, and the vendor peddler needs to be revised as well, because that's really just standard state code. And there's some language that also needs to be added to the vendor peddler, because it really only deals with, they call it the old language of peddler huckster, and that's actually a legal term.
Yeah, it's like quackery, yeah.
Right, and they, you know, they're really designed for people going up to doors and that kind of thing. They're not really designed for merchants, you know, for merchants. It's more, you know, people soliciting door to door. So, there's also some additional language I probably want to have you look at for that.
Okay.
Very simple.
Yeah, I would bring it back. It's time now to vote on this, yes or no.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know much we can do with the language.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, we've been dragging our feet on this, get it back and get it out for a vote.
Okay.
Move on to communications approval, annual audit service proposal 2022-23 through 24-25.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we know we heard our audit last month from
Scott.
CPA Scott Kenny, and he told us at that time that he was no longer going to be doing the governmental audits, and this was his last year. So we did put out for RFPs this last month in December, and we received one quote back from Clifton Larson Allen. They're out of Green Bay, but Scott Sterenhagen, who lives locally, he works for CLA, and he's provided you with his quote. I think he did actually quote the last time when Scott also quoted.
He did,
Yeah.
yes.
I do know that they are doing Kingsford. They just signed up for Kingsford. I do know that, or I've heard that it's harder and harder to find firms to do actual governmental
Yeah,
audits.
because even the ambulances have, we had time, we
I
had,
do believe CLA does the county as well.
Yeah.
And I think they proposed at, didn't Iron Mountain have a meeting last night?
Yep, they did propose that.
And CLA also does Norway Vulcan Area Schools,
yes.
along with several other school districts
Mhm.
in
No.
Wisconsin and Michigan.
Yeah. So now if
Or Scott in particular, does districts in
Yeah,
Wisconsin.
I worked
and
with
Michigan.
Scott on the audit at the school and it was,
So if the concern is that they're getting too spread out, they're very large. They have
Yeah.
enough staff to handle
Yeah,
whatever they're picking up.
I remember when it was a different company that he worked for, and it was bought up, and I believe it turned into the third largest
Yes.
public auditing firm in the nation. So there's ample resources there and support if ever,
Yeah.
need be.
So they have a quote for 3 years. Fiscal year, first year will be fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, and it'll be for 22, 23, and 24. And the prices for them not to exceed would be $33,770, $34,505, and $34,935 respectively.
Well, what is this that he sent that has 28,770 on it?
Okay, so what he's showing in the email that we provided you for additional information, there's if you see, there's a line item, single audit report.
Okay.
If required, for $5,000. We haven't done a single audit in quite a few years. If we had to, and that all depends on grants and other, if you happen to have something during the year that would kick you into that requirement.
Okay.
We're requesting you approve it for that, but most of the years we don't do
do
that.
that.
Okay, so just as I was listening to you quote those numbers, I'm looking at that 28,770, and I think,
Yeah.
so that's with the 5,000.
Yeah.
That may be applicable.
Correct.
Okay, understand. I appreciate how it's broken down. I mean, in my short time, I'm always, not always, but frequently I've been called to the carpet on, how come Norway pays this and Kingsford only pays this, or this district only pays this? And oftentimes people don't realize, well, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
No,
I mean,
and
we have different utilities that we're operating.
Yeah.
We have
that's
different
really
tax
good
rate,
change.
and we've talked about this, we break things up differently on our utilities bill. where other places will just lump them into one category, and it creates confusion. So by Scott providing this, I can now talk more educated on, hey, I heard that it was this much for Norway, but this much for Iron Mountain. Why is that happening? So I appreciate that breakdown. I wish more of that, kind of stuff would be easily accessible.
And just so, if you're watching, big difference is Iron Mountain and Kingsford, they do not have a wastewater treatment plant. They have a wastewater treatment plant authority, and that's a separate audit, just like we would have the North Alert. So that's paid for through the authority.
Okay.
That we also have electric utility and a cable utility that adds cost to audit those. So we have some additional operations that make our operation more expensive to audit.
Well, I think the average Joe just thinks about community size.
Yeah,
You know, and they know that we're not bigger than Iron Mountain, we're not bigger than Kingsford, how come we have to pay more? And that's a great way to.
We can ask them, what are their budgets? Ours is $14 million.
I don't wanna waste that, I just wanna say, look,
Yeah.
here it is, right here, that's why.
Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to accept the proposal from Clifton Larson Allen for performing audit services for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2022, June 30th, 2023, and June 30th, 2024, for a price not to exceed $33,770, $34,505, and $34,935 respectively.
Support.
Mr. Menegini?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Anyone in the audience wishing to address the council on any item of interest shall do so now at the podium. State your name and address for the record. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes per person.
Even some days when there isn't a meeting.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Ron Vivio. I live at N2158 Kearney Lane on Norway Hill. I'm here tonight to address the issue of unlicensed vehicles that is in the newspaper. In May of 2019, we were ordered by the governor to cease operations when it came to any type of outside work with our equipment. I paid $900 and some for a commercial license plate for my dump truck. The insurance on that commercial dump truck was $650 for 6 months. You can no longer get a 6-month plate for commercial vehicles. It's gotta be a 1-year plate. I was able to cancel the insurance, but not the license plates. I now have a dump truck up there. It doesn't have a license plate on it. And my intentions are to use that license plate this summer if things get around. That was 2019. This is the 3rd year of COVID-19. And I don't believe that our economy is gonna pick up all that great this summer. It sure doesn't appear that way. Last summer, there was a lot of people out of work. There was a lot of people that weren't doing anything. A lot of people are hurting right now. And as far as building stuff, very little is going on right now. So now, we've got probably $40,000, $50,000 worth of construction equipment up there that's not being used. And probably won't be used this summer. So the next thing you know, I'm gonna have Jim Schaefer pounding on my door again. What are you gonna do with these vehicles? Or the neighbors will be complaining. What are you gonna do with these vehicles? Now, they didn't have vehicles that were unlicensed for 20 years, parked by their place. People. A vehicle is the second most expensive item that a person's gonna buy. takes it home, and they sit. Maybe he's waiting till he can come up with an extra $1,500 to buy those parts, those electronic parts, or those control parts that he's gonna need to replace that vehicle or repair. People are hurting right now. Now you're gonna make an ordinance that's gonna force people to do some things they normally would not have to do. When I heard this, I couldn't believe it, that during the worst times in history that I know, we're starting to make ordinances that are gonna make people hurt even more than they are now. So, that's what I'm here for this evening. Please consider all the things that I talked about tonight before you vote on any ordinances to make people to get rid of vehicles that are parked in their yard. If they're parked there, it's theirs for a reason, because they're the second most expensive item the person's gonna buy. And it's there for a reason. And before, you know, if the thing would run, I'm not saying in Norway we gotta have like the Beverly Hillbillies where they're sitting up on jack stands or on cement blocks with half the parts gone and chickens are living on the inside. I don't see that in Norway anywhere. I see a few that are sitting there. And I see a few that are waiting on parts.
Ron,
That's all I got to say. Any
Okay.
questions? Any comments?
yeah, I was gonna just comment one thing. Some of these vehicles, just so you know, that we are talking about, they were there long before the COVID even started. You know, that's the problem. Some people are abusing.
Well, you can only jam so much stuff on a 50-foot lot downtown. At your place, you can't see anything.
Right.
At my place, you can see if you look really close.
I do appreciate you coming up and speaking.
Not a problem.
All right,
Thank you,
thank
Mr.
you.
Vivian.
Have a good night. We'll move on to mayor council comments. Brett,
I have none, thank you.
Rico?
Stay healthy and safe, everybody.
I have none for tonight. Oh, I did have one. Just so everybody knows, because we were having the trouble with, the Zoom, the recording with the Zoom, we are no longer gonna Zoom. If something comes up where, we gotta be at home or whatever, we'll go back to Zoom. But we're not gonna offer Zoom because we just, with the equipment we have, you can't, it's doing something with the recordings and stuff. So just so everybody knows that we will, just be
Thanks for
recording.
Trish and crew that helped do that for the last.
Right. And if
Year
something
plus.
comes up where we need it, me and Ray talked, we can
Yeah.
get back into
Yeah.
doing it. Was there anything else?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's not a requirement now. In fact, the state hasn't passed and won't pass
Right.
for allowing remote for especially elected board members.
Right, I see it, I knew it came up, but they
Yeah.
never voted on it, so.
They didn't, they are, and I don't think they voted, actually, I don't think they pushed out or passed for committees as well, appointed committees, which is something that we asked them to consider. Because, you know, if you could sit on one of our boards and committees, and if you say you go down south for 3 months, you can still participate. A lot of people won't participate because they say, well, I'm gonna be gone.
Right.
So, we get where they're coming from. We were hoping that they would pass that. The other is that it costs us like $65 a month to keep the Zoom, and if we don't have to, not a requirement, I mean, that's a legitimate budget item, so, that's another factor.
All right, and then the deadline coming up to, apply for the city manager is what, January?
Yeah, January 7th.
Yeah,
I did get a notice today from Glenn Anderson, and we have 9 applications currently.
okay.
So, of course, they have till the end of the week. So sometime next week, I'll probably get some
Update
information.
on-
Yeah.
Do you give any details beyond 9, like any repeat
There's actually two experienced city managers that have put in, but that's about the only.
That's about the only
information.
details, okay.
Yeah.
And did we put out the help wanted ad in the office?
We did, and that is also due, what, at the end of the week?
Okay,
And we currently do have one application for that,
okay.
so.
I have nothing else. How about you?
I have nothing other than, Happy New Year, and we're rolling into 22, and, stay safe.
Yep.
Same thing.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Support.
Mrs. Brew,
Yes.
Mr. Kramer,
Yes.
Mr. Menegini.
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.